Hey you guys, welcome to True Set Free. This is kind of a special episode. I'll introduce our guest in a minute. My name is Matt Lewis. This is Pastor Steve Whinery from Calvary Chapel Tri-Cities.
I guess.
If you saw our Facebook page post, who I have next to me is Tracy Tribett, and she is an attorney from PJI, the Pacific Justice Institute. She's been a tremendous blessing to us here at Calvary, navigating through the whole COVID thing and giving us just legal advice and ministering to us in the certain way that she has for just legal counsel. So if you didn't see the post, we posted earlier regarding issues and just threw out a couple topics: vaccines, the sexual education bill, parenting laws, all the things that come up that you would want to ask an attorney or had advice from an attorney from a Christian perspective. So if you have questions for Tracy, post them in the comments, whether you're watching YouTube or Facebook, and we'll try and get to them as best we can. For you guys that are normal, you can reach out to me a couple ways. First one is email, crosswalkradio@gmail.com, or you can leave a voicemail or text message to 707-872-7677. I'll share at the end of the program just some of our church services and stuff we have going on. But with no further ado, I'd like to get to the questions and let Tracy bless you guys with just her knowledge base. So are you good? You got anything, Pastor Steve, you want to say to these guys before we start?
What do we do with the people who aren't normal?
What do you mean? What did I say?
You said all you normal people.
Oh.
I'm just messing with you, man.
Yeah. I'm like, what did I say? Open my mouth, insert foot. Yeah, for all you
normal too.
Normal Calvary Chapel, local. I should have said local people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know if I was going to be included in that or not.
None of us. Maybe.
All right. Besides your jokes.
I got nothing else. I'll just sit over here quietly.
Okay. All right. My first one, Tracy, is going to be this. Let me load it up for these guys.
Okay.
And I didn't even hear about this, so hopefully you can explain it. But it says, can you explain the recent orders from Governor Inslee regarding vaccines and what that means for employers/employees? So for us that don't know or aren't in the know, what is this new order that Governor Inslee did, and what does it mean exactly?
So the governor came out with a new order. Functionally, it mandates that employers keep records of whether or not their employees have been vaccinated. And if the employees have been vaccinated, then it's kind of business as usual. If they have not, then they have to continue masking and social distancing. And so what that does effectively if you're an employee, it is like a form of compelled speech where you are being forced to, put your health care information out there. And that's how we're looking at that from a legal standpoint. From an employer standpoint, what it forces you to do is to become sort of like a mandatory reporter, I guess, to L&I. And so again, what the governor has done is he's not mandating it to citizens. He's doing it through agency, and agency, as I've kind of talked about before in other talks here at Calvary, agency is quasi-judicial, quasi-legislative, quasi-executive branch of government that has jurisdiction over certain functions within business usually. And so L&I governs employer-employee relations. And so it's wise, if you will, of the governor to issue this mandate to get an uptick in vaccinations and try to force that on people by going through employers to do it, because then they're putting the pressure on their employees. As far as what this would look like, in a lawsuit or from a litigation standpoint or from an employee, if someone fires you because you won't take the vaccination, that is discriminating on the basis of a protected class if you have a religious objection to taking the vaccine. If you are simply being asked to, mask, not simply being asked to wear a mask, but if you're being asked to wear a mask, then it becomes what constitutional right is being infringed upon, because you don't necessarily have a constitutional right to a job. It's an at-will state. So, there are some technicalities within that. Also, from my standpoint as a lawyer, we like to look at, is it better to bring a lawsuit in state court or federal court? For those of us in the blue states, federal court is always better because then you've got a straight shot of appeal to the Supreme Court. And so I'm not exactly certain how each fact pattern of individuals would play out, but right now the employers aren't really sure what they want to do. The employees aren't really sure, how this is going to shake down for them, because no one wants to be ostracized for their choices. And what this effectively does is create animosity within the people groups at work of, you aren't vaccinated, and why aren't you? So again, this is wise by the governor to do this through L&I. For employers, I think that there will probably be a lawsuit headed in pretty quick because of what it does to employers. If you are a small business, I've talked about 1099 independent contracting some of your employees to the extent that you can. That removes jurisdiction from L&I. That's not possible for everyone in every scenario, and there's different tax applicable rules there. It would just kind of depend on your situation as an employer. This is very new news, and so we haven't seen it played out. And I would be interested to see over time how this does work out and who brings lawsuits. Another interesting point is that the federal government, the CDC, has not approved this vaccine. It's in its trial stages. And so that usually takes 2 to 3 years. They're trying to fast track it. And it will be interesting to see what kind of suits come out in the federal courts once that is, federally approved. And again, the federal government can't force or mandate the vaccines. What they can try to do is use maybe their taxation powers to tax businesses or people if they're not getting the vaccine. And that's what they did with Obamacare when they were trying to get people to get on board for that. They used their powers of taxation. So there's different carrots and sticks that the government can use to incentivize things. And obviously, I don't think that our governor has gotten the response in the vaccine numbers that he wanted to see. And so he's trying to get people, what can we do? How can I get this in effect? And effectively using employers to do the dirty work against the employees and kind of create a hostile work environment, if you will. He's trying his best. So as far as advice to each of you, stand your ground if you don't want to be vaccinated, and please reach out for specific advice in your specific scenario. I do know of some people who've been fired already because of their not wanting to take the vaccine, and so that is, there's a suit there that can be brought, but I don't know exactly what it will look like for employers and employees, and if you would sue your employer for trying to make you do that, or the governor. That's still we're still vetting that.
So for employers, what can L&I do to you if you say no?
Right. Fine you. We looked at it last week when the PJI lawyers kind of talk on phone calls each week, and in California, what they roughly came up with, if you refuse to, depending on the number of employees and the maximum fine per day, you can get to $80,000 in a week of the fines. I guess the good thing, if you will, about that is those fines are often drastically reduced. You take them to court and you try to get an injunction, which is most likely what a business in Washington would seek to stop the L&I from enforcing that. The unfortunate part about getting involved and entangled in agency proceedings is that you have to fully go through all of their appeals and the court process before you could bring a lawsuit in federal court. In my mind, federal court's always a better place to be. They've got more money, they operate things in a more clean and smooth manner, and again, less politics, more law.
Right.
So that was my question too, is what can they do to employers you mentioned taxes, which is obviously a monetary incentive, but they can actually fine employers for not mandating the vaccine. Is there any, immediately in my mind, I think of HIPAA violations.
Right.
Is there any precedents as far as vaccinations for employees in the past that have nothing to do with COVID? Is there any groundwork in the legal regarding this?
Not that I know of in specific case law. Again, with HIPAA, you've got federal mandates, and then you've got the state mandates that come with L&I. So I don't know what the intersection there would look like. And, on the ground, just like with COVID, technically L&I could have come to any church and they could have said, what are you doing for your employees to ensure that you're abiding by the governor's mandates? Did they do that a lot? I don't think so, not without a prompting of a reporting or something. And so an employer is supposed to keep a record of how they are monitoring vaccination in their employees, what they're doing. And so if you have one employee who is vaccinated and one who's not, what the complaint would likely come from is the vaccinated employee is going to say, our employer, my employer, is not properly requiring this person to either wear a mask or get the vaccine, or doesn't have documentation of their exemption properly, and is putting me at risk. And that's where the L&I protection comes in. And again, the government is always trying to get its jurisdiction around you, and it does it through agency, whether it's for L&I with employers, Department of Health with restaurants, and other things that we saw with COVID of how they were shutting restaurants down. There's all different ways to attack this, but again, the governor knows what he's doing, and he went through L&I, because then you've got 4 degrees of separation. It's the employee, the employer, the L&I, OSHA, and then the governor. So you've got a wide berth there away from him. And he's consistently said, I'm not enforcing these orders, I'm just giving them. That's not a legal defense in court, but it makes for good enforcement now.
Yeah.
So I've read anywhere from like 40 to as much as 60% of different, interestingly enough, government agencies like the military, nurses, or the medical field, and of course certain hospitals are probably different statistically, but that don't want to get the vaccine. And so why do you think, and maybe this is a question for Pastor Steve, but why do you think there's this huge push to mandate this vaccine for statistically a relative controlled virus? I know people are going to freak out as soon as they hear those words connected with COVID, but statistically, right, there's still this huge push that you have to get this in order to do A plus B, so much so that even if 60% of the medical professionals are like, hey, we don't want to do this, they're still railroading in. Why?
Right. And Pastor Steve could probably talk more to it. I think it's a march towards the mark of the beast. How can we get people in compliance? And eventually and Satan knows this, the only exemption that will be viable in this particular scenario would be a religious exemption, based on the way that the vaccines are made. And so eventually that narrows the people group down further and further into Christians, and then it may further split the church as to, who does and who doesn't and what those views are. That's consistently in my mind what it's looked like. And as far as the percentages, it's interesting because what you've got with cases like Roe v. Wade, the government cannot interfere or unduly burden someone's right to their privacy and their health choices. Well, what is the demarcation? Why is this different? What makes this different than the applicable precedent in Roe v. Wade? And I would be excited to see an attorney use that premise. It's just, who do you bring suit against, and how does that work out? We've been successful for a good number of our clients at PJI in getting them the vaccine exemption. And I think the hype and the hysteria is, again, the less you know God, the more you fear death and don't know what's going to happen. You're trying to preserve your life, and you want everyone to just get on board with that. And it makes no sense, but these are the times.
Yeah, I think there's a political aspect to this too. You have a whole group of the political spectrum that has basically hyped this up to the point that it's just ridiculous. Right. Talking about following the science, and then they refuse to follow the science in the issue. And at the very beginning, when there wasn't a whole lot of knowledge about what was going on with the vaccine, I could see some reticence about just being careful and that kind of thing. But the more that we know about this, the more that we're understanding that it's not the bubonic plague, right. And it is it is not anything like polio or some of these other diseases that are just debilitating. And so I think that there's a political aspect to this too, which ultimately comes down to who's pushing the politics. And by that I mean there's always behind the scenes thing going on with the enemy, with Satan. And he wants, basically he wants to disrupt anything that leads towards freedom, and he wants to bring people into bondage, and he wants people who are willing to put other people in bondage. And just like Tracy was saying, this whole thing's going a certain direction, and it's going the direction of the mark of the beast, which comes from the Antichrist, and he is a world dictator, and so we're moving towards dictatorship. Ultimately, when you look at this stuff, but I think on the here and now level, I think we've got a bunch of people who are pridefully holding on to positions and statements and attitudes that they've made, and trying to force this, on a populace that's now looking at it and going, really, what is actually going on here, like these guys said, what we're dealing with is an experimental vaccine, and so the FDA has not approved this, and so it's a big experiment at this point until the FDA actually approves it. And so I can see the reticence of a lot of people in taking the vaccine, because you don't know exactly what the consequences are, and what the effects are going to be on the body, and that is the fault of the medical community and the media, because they're not being open and transparent about what's going on with that. I think if they were, then there'd be a lot of people who are less worried about whether or not they should take it. So.
And I think the immediacy of it, like you have to get it now, versus it's choice, and you can choose to get it or not, and just. I don't know, it's the lack of choice and freedom and choice that I think is the most concerning. And it's interesting how it's evolved. Last year it was, there will never be a vaccine passport, and that's crazy, it won't head that way. And it is. And it's a slow march with each, passing day.
Your papers, please.
Yeah. Card carrying member.
Exactly.
So this is a big one for me. Why do you think that people, and I was completely surprised by this, the way it went down. I was completely surprised. Why do you think people don't stand up, don't say no, just are so almost or COVID mandate? It's like there's no resistance. And the second part to that is from the beginning, when everyone's trying to figure this out, we were all kind of in the same boat. But shortly thereafter, there were businesses who kind of went two ways. One, who were mandatory, do not step into my business without a mask. And then there were businesses who, pretty close from the beginning and this whole time, I would walk in there without a mask, just do my thing, and they left me alone. Right. And is that because those specific businesses weren't big enough to get targeted, so they got left alone? Or is there something else that people were in fear without being educated? And then last thing, because I like to spread truth wherever I go, is I'll ask people, why are you doing this? What's your policy? And it's amazing. It's in the 90% of either employees or bosses or managers who have no idea why they're doing it. They don't know if it's the policy of their company or if it's the governor's mandates. Right. They just go, I just work here. Right. And there's no intelligent thought after that. So if that makes sense, why the dichotomy of some people that are radical and some people that aren't? Right.
Do you want me to?
Well, I think that people have a different makeup. I think some of this is political too. If my political party is behind it, then I'm going to be behind it. And I think it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if Trump had stayed in office in this situation. I just wonder how this whole thing would have played out. And not that it wouldn't have been the same. I like to know what's going into my body, and so I'm one of those guys that wants to know more about what's happening with specifically RNA vaccines and that kind of stuff. And so it wouldn't have really changed things with me, but I wonder what would have happened to cross party lines if it had been a different party in the White House. And so that may have changed things, because you always have a group of people who are just going to follow along with the guy that they agree with, which is kind of a scary thing. Yeah. In the sense that the guy we're supposed to be agreeing with is a Lord, and he needs to come first. And so I think there's an aspect of that, and I think that's the major push right at this point. The media before Trump was out of office was all up in arms about the fact that the vaccines weren't going to get here in time, and may not be effective, and they were downplaying the whole thing. And as soon as it's a Democrat in office, all of a sudden the media is doing this push. And again, I think that you have a group of people who follow what they're told. This has been the standard for humans all down through the ages. It's why the Bible talks about the fact that you don't want to allow a false teacher in the church, because they'll lead people astray. There's a reason that Jesus compares us to sheep. And a lot of people are just sheep in that kind of sense. When you've got a good shepherd, when you're following the Lord, then it's awesome, and it's a great thing to do. When you got a bad shepherd, we all have shepherds. So our shepherd is Jesus Christ, and we follow him, and we do what the Bible says. When you're talking about people who are outside of Christ, they're sheep too. And so they're going to be following someone, and many people follow blindly. And I think that that's a lot of what's going on with it. I think that's a lot of the dynamics behind this whole thing, is just that attitude of following blindly. And they put labels on it, and now all of a sudden we got a bunch of people who last year were not patriotic at all, and all of a sudden it's all patriotism to get the vaccine, and that is just specious on the face of it. I think I think there's an issue with that. So I think people are sheep, and depending on who the shepherd is, they're going to be following that person. And again, that's why we get to where we get in the book of Revelation. You've got the Antichrist coming along, and the whole world worships the beast. Very few people don't.
I think it's interesting too, and you've talked about it on Sundays before, how with each generation there's more mutations, like how many more mutations. And I just think from a functional perspective, we have dumbed society down so much. We've put so much power and authority in our doctors, our lawyers, our government, and written God out of society, such that now government is God, and then all these people who we esteem highly now can tell us what to do and how to do it. And so I think that some businesses just, it depends on the person. If they didn't want to require that or thought it was bogus, they didn't. And others are really fearful and scared, and it just came down to personal choice of the businesses, which, again, it should be personal choice. And that is the premise upon which a free person lives, is that as long as you're not, harming another person, you can make a choice. The genius and the evil is that with the virus, you're harming someone else if you're not doing this, and then it casts that light back on a person. So fear.
I think that the situation with businesses too is, I never had a problem walking into a business, and if the business owner wanted me to wear a mask, because the guy just wants to be in business, and he doesn't want to be hassled by the agencies, like you were talking about. I never had a problem with that. But then on the other hand, even though the church is more than a business, it's still a business. I don't like it when agencies tell me what I have to do with employees, especially if they, aren't interested in doing that. So having the choice is a good idea. And, around here, we haven't had an issue with COVID, except for you. You got it. I don't know where you got it from, but...
Bummer.
No comment on that. I'm not even going to go in there. Last thought on that, though, it was interesting to watch the transformation of people's hearts and minds to the fear that's being pushed by the media or whoever. I remember walking into Costco when this first happened, and it was like maybe 10% of people wearing masks because they hadn't forced that you wear a mask to enter the store. And then the next time it was 20, and then 30, and then 50. And then somewhere in that percentage, Costco mandated, and you couldn't enter their store without it.
Yep.
Well, now, because I think the CDC has removed the mask mandate or recommendation, I was told that you could go in there now, and they don't hassle you. But now it's flopped. Right. Now you still have, even though you don't have to, the majority wearing masks. And it's like this whole flop of... I was told I had to, and there was resistance, and now they're so far the other way that they're doing it even though you don't have to. Right. And it's kind of like mind-boggling to me, the transformation.
I think it's like seat belts.
Where's Mitch? We're talking about the seatbelt law.
Yeah, when we started out with seatbelts, I had started wearing seatbelts before the seatbelt law came in, because I'm around first responders, and it seemed like a good idea. So it wasn't a big, huge deal to me. But one of the things that happens after you start doing something that's mandated like that is, if you're not wearing it, you feel naked.
Right.
Yeah, it feels weird.
It's an interesting point.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they bought into it early, and CDC may say, yeah, it's over and you can stop, but they still feel weird without a mask on their face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's weird just hearing you say that. But I remember going hiking at Mount Rainier, and we're 3 miles up in the woods, in the mountains, and people are walking by me with their masks on.
Right. Or turns aside away from you, like,
Yeah.
get near you.
All right, I have a bunch of other stuff here, so we'll move on. This is more, and you kind of hit on this already, but can they legally mandate a vaccine in order to fly or travel? A lot of people are worried about this. Like you mentioned, the mark of the beast, the restrictions on movements of people and tracking and things. What do you say legally in regards to this?
I mean, you don't have a constitutional right to travel, necessarily. There are ways that I think states, depending on the states, could challenge this with interstate commerce, and the free movement of people, but you don't have a constitutional right. And to further complicate it, as we saw during the lockdown, all airlines were still going. And it's like, you can't be here together, but you can get onto a jumbo metal tube with consistently recycled air, and that's fine. And so the FAA has kind of like maritime law. They have their own set of laws, and really, I don't even know what the law is when you get up in the air. It's one of those mercurious areas of law, and so I think that they probably could. If they decline to allow you to fly and you have a religious reason not to, then they would be denying you public accommodation on the basis of a protected class, and so you would have a suit potentially there. That would be my best answer for that.
Okay. Sean's on Facebook. He asks, Tracy, Inslee issued new COVID workplace restrictions that leads to vaccine passports. I will not be getting a vaccine. What paperwork can I hand to my employer to help educate them of our rights?
So what I have done with schools, and this is different because now we're talking about adults, but within the schools there's an exemption form from the vaccine, and so maybe a modified version of that I'm kind of working on. Also a scriptural basis for your reason not to take the vaccine that has outlined the scriptures, which I've got some citations for, and you or people can reach out to me for that. And then we have a letter from PJI regarding kind of the law in the matter. A few cases, again, with employers and employees. We're an at-will state, so it's a little bit different, but it would be more in the sense of, if you fired me because of this, if you're a place of public accommodation, you won't let me in because of this, you're put on notice now that this is why I can't, and if you deny me access, then you are discriminating against me on the basis of my protected class, which is my being a Christian. And so that would be how you would sort of, we'll see. That's how you would start that process and see what comes of it. Again, just like people can present a vaccine card, my thought is to present a vaccine exemption card that's based on, a religious exemption, and have sort of a short form of what I just said on it to carry around. How that will play out, I don't know.
All right. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate your question. My next one, kind of switching topics here. Unless you guys have stuff, post them and we can go back. But this is a new one because of the way school's going. But it says this: are we allowed to record our kids' Zooms when they are doing school online? And I kind of have an idea where you're going to go legally. So I might be devil's advocate, but what do you say to this situation where parents are now watching their kids obviously learn online, which has opened the eyes and done different things in our society, but what do you say about this?
No. you have to have someone's consent in order to record them. And there's all kinds of case law on that. And as we've seen with the government, when they try to record people without their knowledge or without having a proper warrant, it's inadmissible. But if you've got a problem and you're a parent who's observing this, you're the witness. Maybe your child would be one witness, but you're a parent who's the dual witness there. And if it ever came down to it where you had to bear witness to whatever the teacher said, you saw that and you observed that. You can take your own notes, etc., but you don't need to record the teacher. Now, I don't know if Zoom records all of the things that are going on. I doubt it, because there's so many Zoom meetings, and I don't think that they are required to, nor could they. It's a possibility, but again, if you're witnessing something, just like in any other legal proceeding or scenario, you've borne witness to that, and then you just attest to what you heard and saw.
So, go ahead.
Yeah. So what are the rules concerning being in the public, where there's more than two people
Right.
in the
It's
in
that
the situation?
privacy interest. A public figure who is out, like a congressman or someone like that. They're in a public office. A teacher is kind of a quasi-public office, but you don't have access to go into the school. Like, it's a public school, but you can't just walk in there, walk into the classroom and do, what you want. And with Zoom, they're broadcasting into your home, which is not necessarily a public space. Again, the case law hasn't been fully vetted on this issue, but I would err on the side of caution and not record someone, because you can get into it quick with that. But it's not a per se public place, and they're not a public figure.
Yeah, that was my question exactly. Is people get confused as, well, why can police have body cameras, or people can record the police?
Right.
There's nothing you can do about that, but it's because it's a public forum. Whereas if it's in your home or private, or it's an individual that hasn't gave their permission,
Right.
then you're violating their rights by
Right.
recording.
Well, and if the teacher's breaking the law, like, the body cam, you're investigating something that someone is breaking the law. And so that's different than just, recording the teacher for purposes unknown in a future, setting. So I guess if the teacher is doing something highly illegal, then yes, but not just on a general, record this, keep it, and go back through and see what's going on here.
Has there been any cases floating around now that we have all these YouTube videos about teachers and the recordings and the things that they say, whether they're right or left?
Right.
Anybody taking this to court for violation of their rights?
Not that I know of, because usually what you have when people are recorded is like there was a bus driver hitting someone, or someone who's doing something very wrong, and they have no defense, really, to that. And I don't know that you could use that as a defense, saying, well, I didn't give permission for someone to videotape me while I was breaking the law. That's not a defense. And I'm not aware of any situations in which someone's been recorded, like a teacher, without their knowledge, just doing something like maybe communist rhetoric or something the parent doesn't like, or berating a child, those kinds of things. Though that would not go well. If you've got a case to make against a teacher and they're doing something to your child that you're not happy with, write down those things, and then you're a witness to it, and so is your child, and you both bear witness without having to have the video there. Unless you tell a teacher, I'm going to start recording this now. Then they're put on notice.
Okay, let's see if this fits. We'll adjust that in a second, guys. Okay, another public school question. How do I protect my kids in the public school system, or is there a way to guard them from the sexual education curriculum that is being pushed? A lot of people have questions on how to navigate this in the public school system.
Right. There are a lot of RCWs, which is a revised code of Washington. Those are the statutes that implement these types of teachings, whether they're whatever they are. And so what I have drafted is a form that effectively exempts your child out of that you want to have on hand at the school. There are other things from healthcare. They're going to start to put these healthcare clinics in schools, which will probably be something like a Planned Parenthood. And after the age of 13, you don't necessarily, as a parent, have a right to get your child's healthcare information. And so this would be important. This now would make it important to have the exemption on file at the school that puts them on notice of all the things that you want your child exempted out of. Empower your child to exercise their protest rights, to stand up and walk out of class. Because a lot of the way that it's written is that teachers can incorporate any of these teachings or doctrines into any period in class. It's not reserved for humanities. Sometimes it is, but not always. And so your child can get up and walk out of class in order to protest that, to refuse to go to assemblies and things like that where such things will be discussed. You want to empower your child to speak out and not be fearful of retribution, whether it's from classmates or teachers or things like that. I think that's what we have to empower our children with, is the idea that you don't have to fit in. You can stand out for the right things, and that's hard. It's hard for adults, it's really hard for kids, but you have to start prepping that now and have a talk with your child and say, I'm exempting you from these things. Is there anything else that that is bothersome to you? Geometry probably won't fly to get exempted out of that. But a medical power of attorney, you can have that on file. I'm still not entirely sure how that would work with a child, because technically a medical power of attorney is giving agent authority to a parent, which you kind of already have, but it's just sort of specifying that. But whether or not it's binding, if the child changes their mind, if your child changes their mind, but it would be a good idea to have something like that on hand where your child is saying, I'm delegating my medical making decisions to my parent. Again, I've said this, but you've got to have a tight walk with your child, and it's got to start sooner than later, because if your child's already 13 and they're in the public school system, and you're fighting this type of thing already, you're going to have an uphill battle. So,
as you're sitting there talking about that, it's frustrating and whatever, I don't know what the word is, just crazy in my mind to think of. Growing up, and I don't mean to sound like an old guy, well, in my day, but I really feel that way now, is because growing up, it's like you didn't challenge authority in that sense, right? Like you respected the teachers and the cops and everything, and I don't want this to be miscommunicated, because you should still do that, but I really have to train my kid now to obey authority, but at the same time have wisdom and question what they're doing, and you don't just blindly follow what people say anymore. And now, because of the morality switch or change, this is like front and central, and it's an issue. And then the people who have grown up not challenging authority are now in a situation as a believer where you could be in trouble with the Lord or with your Christian walk or what God wants you to do by listening to that authority. And it's this weird limbo that at least I've never seen in our country to this extent.
Well, and that's what you were talking about earlier with, how are these people, we're all just listening to what they say, and then we're wearing masks, and it's the perfect bait, if you will. Satan's wise. He knows what he's doing. He's been around. He's seen humanity. So you set up this brilliant country, and our forefathers have this constitution, and then he sees a way in which you start giving government more power. Respect your authority, respect the government and what they're doing, and then make it such that you have total trust in your government, and then flip the politics of it, the morality of it, and then now you've got everyone, and they're already abiding by whatever the government says and does, and now everyone just goes along. No matter, we've completely changed and flipped the morality or the integrity of what we're asking our citizens to do. You just follow along and do what we say. We'll strip you of your rights. You no longer, are considered a free person, essentially. You just do what we say. And so you're right. It is hard to give your children the right amount of salt with which to season their lives and interact with individuals, and then, still keep it with some sugar so that they have favor and can interact in society and be fruitful. And I don't know what exactly that balance is, but it is a concern and needs to be prayerfully walked out.
So what do you say about that, Pastor Steve, on how to navigate that as a Christian? And on to that point, like, our school over here is blowing up because of these issues. People are like, I'm done with public school. They're trying to find alternatives. So people go into private school and whatever, but you can't avoid the world, right? So how do we walk through this, and what's God say about it?
Well, ultimately, submission has a hierarchy, and so we submit to God first. And so, all through Scripture, you see it numerous times in the book of Acts where Peter and John, for example, say whether we should obey God or you decide, but we're going to be telling people what God has told us, to paraphrase the passage. And so when there was a choice between government authority, and that's who they were talking to the Sanhedrin at that point, when there was a choice between government authority and their unscriptural demands and following the Lord, they picked following the Lord. And it happened every single time. And so it didn't matter if you were just talking about Jewish authority or if you were talking about Roman authority. Paul did the same thing in Philippi and in the other places that he went. And he used the legal system to make it easier to spread the gospel. He wasn't above doing that. And so there's a lot of wisdom in Paul's interactions with the government's interactions, governing authorities. But ultimately, it's like this in everything. I need to honor authority. I need to honor my father and mother. It's the first. I need to be honoring God, and that's the basis of authority in our, just in our civilization. And the problem comes in when the authority is unwilling to bow to God. And then it's at that point that you have to make decisions. I will not disobey God based on the fact that this guy tells me to. And that's where the line's drawn. Right. And so it doesn't matter if it's in high school or if it's in an office setting, or if it's with a politician, or if it's with a police officer. It doesn't matter who it is. Or with your husband, or with your wife, or with your father or your mother. It doesn't matter who it is. If God has said something different, and not making excuses, like God just spoke to me and told me I don't have to do the dishes, Mom, or whatever. But if it's really a situation where there is a principled issue, then Christians are called to stand up for the principle, and the principle is God first. And so I think that's something that everybody needs to have figured out in their own walks with God, and every kid that's growing up in our household should know these things. That was something that was basic when I first became a Christian. When I first became a Christian, I had nobody teaching me, but I could tell from reading the Bible that I have to obey God over men, and so I never thought of this as something that was hard to navigate. Right. I came from a military family, and so respect to authority has always been big with me. But again, when the authority is disobeying God, I have a respect for God. And so he's the ultimate authority. He's a general, and so what he says goes.
I think even the church got caught in this place where they didn't have their theology squared away or what, but you see a lot of churches that, and I got so tired of, Romans 13, 1 Peter chapter 2. And even I'll say pastors, even a lot of pastors had no idea the theological implications or how to navigate that verse. Right. and unpack it. And they were erring on the side of following man's orders versus worshiping God and going to church. It was really mind-blowing to me. But should we be excited about the churches? And I'm really proud of the guys who did make a stand and who didn't waver about some of the legal stuff coming out of California and the stuff with Newsom. Should we be excited because we had some victories in the Supreme Court with that? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. God's providence in Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying, and then her name is slipping my mind right now. Amy Coney Barrett Comey.
Amy Coney Barrett.
Yeah, and her being put on the court completely shifted the majority. And so what we've had over the last year is about 4, maybe 5 cases. There was the Archdiocese case out of New York where Cuomo was allowing super targets to be opened in the red zones. And you can have up to, based on their numbers, 250 plus people in a super target, but you couldn't have churches open even for sacrament, for anything. And so they won a case there that he had to treat them similarly situated because he was discriminating against churches. And then Newsom, there's 4 or 5 different cases there that, because we're in the Ninth Circuit, and so with federal courts there's different circuits, and then there's different justices who preside over those circuits. And a lot of the times the justices will decide those cases, cases that are appealed, and there's a process to go through. Again, we're in federal court here, but she has referred quite a few of the church cases to the court, the full court, and they have decided in favor of California being able to open up their churches and meet in person. There's still some restrictions, numerically to that, and masks, and Santa Clara County is particularly harsh. And then Newsom now, he is being recalled. They've started that process and they've got the signatures. And the irony there is that I think Bruce Jenner is now going to run it, but he's a conservative, and it would be interesting if what transpires there. But there are different people who are going to run against Newsom, and so he has backpedaled quickly off of his stance and is trying to get California opened back up in a hurry. And so I think in a way, yes, it's exciting for Washington and the case, but the case law, I mean, literally the last time the Supreme Court saw a case from the Ninth District or Circuit, they basically said, we've seen this case and we've seen cases like this and we're tired of seeing them. Please get your act together and start deciding these cases in line with what we have said before. And so I don't think churches are in danger of being shut down again. Now we move on to the vaccination issues or the things in that vein, masks.
Is that because of the switch of the numbers in the Supreme Court? Because I've seen a lot of cases, Second Amendment included, of the Supreme Court just not even acknowledging, and now they're starting to take them. Is that because they're tired of the lower courts not honoring what the Supreme Court said?
Yes, absolutely. And you've got that conservative majority now. So their lawyers are also a lot more willing to bring certain cases because as lawyers, you don't want to bring a case that will set a bad precedent. So if I've got, especially with these vaccine cards and the employees, it has to be the right scenario in order to get the outcome that sets case precedent is what determines. I mean, courts unfortunately rely more on precedent, which is what the court has decided previously, than they even do really in on anything else. And so they'll look to and weigh in with precedent. If you set a poor precedent and get your case defeated because you didn't wait or didn't have patience, and my boss at PJI is brilliant in this, he waits and waits, and we brought a case, we didn't bring it until September because then things were starting, Amy Coney Barrett got on the court and then it was a good time to bring it. And so you're going to see a lot more cases. They're in that Second Amendment and in that vein of the more conservative lines of argument to the Supreme Court because they want to get that precedent on the books quickly.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left or so. Here's another one that's come up lately. What is the law, RCW, what is the law in Washington regarding spanking your kids?
It falls under, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, it falls under the abuse, the definition of abuse in there, but it states specifically that nothing in this code shall be construed so as to impede a parent's ability to discipline their child. What I would highly recommend is that you do it privately and at home, and that it just be something that is strictly on the bottom. God didn't put any vital organs in the bottom for a reason, and that's so that you can spank your child there. So, that's a safe space. And but again, I've seen court cases where they'll have in the documentation that parent spanks child and those kinds of things. You have to use the law on your side if you get a case referred to DCYF, and to use of force on children. It's the RCW 9A 16100. And again, it's talking about assault and abuse, and then encouraging people to report such, but also our legislature is good about reserving in there, saying that this should not. I'm trying to see. So stating or correcting, the age and size, reasonable or moderate. It talks about just reasonable and moderate, and the use of force by another person is unlawful unless it's reasonable and moderate and is authorized in advance by the child. Well, this is for teachers.
Right.
Yeah. So, it says, however, the physical discipline of a child is not unlawful when it's reasonable and moderate and is inflicted by a parent, teacher, or guardian. So even teachers have the right to spank. It's reasonable and moderate, and a swift swat on the bottom will put a child in line and let them know that you care. But I wouldn't do it in a public place because everyone is just, absolutely crazy when it comes to reporting other parents. Again, we're this hypercritical, judgmental society that thinks that, usually it's all social workers don't have kids, and so the lens through which they view these kinds of things is more scrutinous than you would have for a parent who knows how kids can be, and your neighbors are more than willing to report you, or the person at the grocery store, etc. So just be careful. Do your spanking in your home, on the bottom.
Okay, I'll put this up here in a second. One question that's come up is people that are worried about, going off of what you just said, getting turned in by other people. Is there anything that people can do to avoid, whether it's their employee or employer or the mask mandate or spanking, to avoid getting turned into the Board of Health or whatever legal authority or agency law that they were worried about? Is there any recommendations you would give?
Agency law is really tricky. They can and will use anything that you say against you. And because it's civil proceedings and not criminal, their standard of being able to access information is very low. It's not like a criminal proceeding where you've got different, case law that sets a precedent as to what they can use in court and what they can't. It's very, very low burden of proof in agency proceedings. And it usually goes on, and you appeal it, and even their own judges are elected from within inside the agency. So my best advice to you is not to get entangled in it, to say as little as possible, to get an attorney there for you, and try to kick the can down the road as much as you can. Because again, any answer that you give is not the right answer. No matter how much you try to explain your situation, no matter how right you think you are, no matter how ridiculous the allegations seem, the more that you explain, they write every single thing down, and then they misconstrue it, and then they mislabel it, and will whip it into what they want it to be, to make it look like you've done something wrong, more erroneous than the case may actually be. And they're aggressive, especially, the Attorney General governs all of this. And the Attorney General has endless resources and will come, if you don't comply immediately with what they want, they'll come after you in a very swift and very aggressive fashion. So your best bet is to get an attorney and not talk with them, because it doesn't go well.
So that's what I've seen lately, and it's like the people that want to stand up for righteousness, as believers, to follow the Lord, to raise their kid in a godly way. It's a hard stance to make nowadays, because you want to make that stand. At the same time, you have to have so much wisdom, because if you make an error, or if you don't understand what legal ground you're in, you can be doing godly things, but at the same time hating yourself, because they're going to go after you because of what you said or what you did in a technicality based sense. And a lot of people, because they don't, there's this whole, we called it legalese, but there's this whole way to talk and act and write a report and everything, that if you mess up or say, they're going to be used against you in court, even though your intentions are well-meaning.
Right.
So with that, and you hit on it already, but how do you best explain to people to make stands and stand up for what's right, at the same time protect yourself and have wisdom? How is a person supposed to navigate this path?
Right. It becomes a different consideration if you've got kids, obviously, depending on which agency we're talking about and who you're responsible for. Less talking is always better. If you want to take a stance on something, wait until God provides you the opportunity to do so. Because I think what our tendency is to just espouse what we think, whether it's on Facebook or anything else. We've got a lot of avenues for free speech, and you can do that, but all speech comes at a certain cost. And so to stand up and be righteous oftentimes is just to be silent in the face of whatever it is that you're fighting. So I don't know that that's the best advice in all scenarios, but let the Lord lead you always, because we have a tendency to talk too much, think too little, and entangle ourselves in a mess that we don't need.
So this reminded me when Steve was teaching Bible study on, remember when the Capitol thing was going on, and you were talking about telling people that, hey, if you're going to make these stands, you got to be willing to pay the price. Same kind of thing?
Well, yeah, I think so. When you're looking at some of the stuff that Tracy is talking about, especially when you're dealing with CPS or any kind of agency like that, they're not your friends and they're not like you. And I think that a lot of people think that because they're well-meaning and because they have a righteous standard for the things that they're doing, whatever those things may be, that they think that they're going to be able to talk to these people and that they're going to be reasonable. And you cannot do that with certain people, certain types of people, because they're not there to be reasonable. They're there to find a problem, and they're there to make you the problem in the situation. And obviously, it's not talking about everybody, but if I was dealing with somebody that was coming up and questioning, the way that I was raising my kids, I wouldn't, like Tracy said, I wouldn't be talking a lot with them. I'd immediately get a lawyer. They're not my friend, and I've heard that stated about the media, for example. People think that they can say whatever to the media, and that they're going to bring it across in a way that's reasonable. And again, there are instances where that's absolutely true, but in most instances, they're not your friend. And so the more that you say, the more they can use against you. And so I think that's wisdom there. Jesus said, "Be as wise as a serpent, but harmless as a dove." And so again, not everybody thinks like me, and you can't assume that they do, because they don't. And not everybody has the same morality that I have, so you can't assume that they do, because they don't. And sometimes people just flat out have agendas. And so again, you need to watch out for that. And having said all that, there are times when you stand up and you make a stand and you say what needs to be said. But again, you have to count the cost on that. So if it was dealing with my children, I wouldn't be having a righteous rant about my children in front of a CPS agent. If it was just me, and I knew that the cost might be going to jail for something like that, then that's something that's different than my children being taken away, because a crazy person's come into my house and flipped my words around. And so again, we need to. I think that what Tracy is saying is absolutely wise. Those are mistakes that I've made over the years in dealing with bureaucrats specifically, thinking that they were reasonable and that they were there to help me and that kind of thing. And turned out that it wasn't like that. And again, not with everybody, but with the majority in these situations. That's how it goes.
These are big battles. I'm not trying to trivialize them and say, "Oh, you just stand down and be quiet." But there's wisdom in looking at how David fought Goliath. He went to Saul and he was like, "Put on the armor and just get all this gear and you'll be great and it'll go." And David was like, "I just need 3 stones." And so whatever your 3 stones are to fight your battles with, if you find yourself with a government agency, just keep that premise in mind, that the simpler is better, and that usually involves less talking.
Yeah.
Perfect response.
Yeah. We only have a few minutes left, so I'll end it with what should we as Christians be praying about? What's on the horizon, or what's coming up in the court system that will kind of move religious liberty in a direction? Is there anything that should we be on our radar that we can be praying for? And then I'll ask you to let these guys know how you can get how they can get a hold of you, reach out, get resources through PJI and your contact and stuff.
Yeah. So prayer-wise, I know that I don't remember the circuit that it's in. I want to say like Arkansas, Mississippi, somewhere, challenging Roe v. Wade for fetuses that are over 12 or 13 weeks. And I don't have the specifics, but be prayerful for that God's will would be done there. And then also, as Pastor Steve said, to be as cunning as a serpent, but as harmless as a dove. Did I have that right? I always get it mixed with sheep and snakes. But using, like Roe v. Wade is a long-standing, atrocious case, but it is a long-standing case, and how can you, if you can pray for lawyers to have wisdom in using the existing precedent that's not going anywhere to help bolster arguments about people's privacy as we get those things stripped from us going forward with vaccinations or with freedoms and different things. How can we use precedent wisely in order to help people keep their freedoms? Obviously, Roe v. Wade being overturned would be ideal, but there is precedent out there that can be used if it's used rightly. And then just for people to stand up against oppression. as we march towards the mark of the beast, I think that's going to be the hardest thing, because we all live really cush lives.
Yeah.
We're not like people who preceded us in previous generations who have really had to struggle for our faith. I mean, this last year has been the closest we've come to that, and so I think it's not going anywhere. It's going to get harder to express our faith because we're going to be ostracized, and you can get a hold of me at, I'm not going to give my phone number, but if you go to PJI's website, which is pji.org, there is a link there that will get an email forwarded to me, and I can help you. And PJI represents people cost-free. It costs $1 for us to represent you to make it a legally enforceable contract, but we are free legal aid, and we'll take all cases, not just the big ones that are big name, but any issue you have, we'll be willing to help as long as there's a religious nexus for the issue.
All right. Thank you, Tracy, for coming on. We super appreciate it. You're a blessing here for us, for sure. And guys, keep her in prayer. I consider you kind of on the front lines of the fight for...
Scary indeed.
Yeah.
To consider me on the front lines.
Yeah, well, you're doing a great job, and we
Thank you.
appreciate it, and it's definitely needed, especially in America right now. So, thanks, guys. Hopefully that was a blessing to you. Again, if you need help, reach out to PJI. They're a great resource for you guys who are normal, local,
Only normal people are local.
Go back to if you missed the inside joke. It was at the beginning of the program. But if you guys want to reach out for us, normal Q&A. I said the word normal again. crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You guys can text us 707-872-7677. If you are looking for a church or you want to be in fellowship, there's a couple ways and services that we have. So on Sunday mornings, we have a 7:30 indoor service. And then because the weather's so nice, we have an outdoor service, outdoor amphitheater, which is at 9:15 or 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. We also have a 6:30 p.m. Wednesday and Sunday evenings. Currently on Wednesday, Pastor Steve is going through a marriage, parenting, or dating, marriage, and parenting series. So that'd be a great one for you guys to come to. And then I don't know what you're doing on Sunday nights. Are you in a new book now? Did you finally finish Joshua?
I just finished Joshua, and actually, I'm not going to be doing anything until I get back.
Oh, that's right.
On vacation. So
Okay, surprise.
Yeah.
You'll have to be surprised.
I have to be surprised.
So,
Actually, I'm planning on doing a study on UFOs.
oh, that's right. Yeah, you're supposed to say that last week. So for all you extraterrestrial enthusiasts, I'm sure you'll be chomping at the bit when Pastor Steve teaches on UFOs. Ha ha ha. All right. God bless you guys. Hopefully that was a blessing to you. I know it was for me. We'll see you guys next week, Wednesday at 3:30.